Good morning. Happy New Year to you. I'm here today to talk to you about storms. I hate storms. I hate storms. Well, as long as I'm indoors looking out a window, they're okay, but I don't like to be caught in one. Yesterday, I was able to speak on behalf of Chris Leonard's and Bill and Glenna's son, who died. Bill and Glenna were in a storm yesterday. Some of you, I see Sherry, you know what it is to be in a storm. Mike Cabot, you know what it is to be in a storm. What I watched yesterday, what I think I've watched in your lives is there's a Jesus that is the ever-present help in the storms of life. I'm going to be looking today at a text, if you would turn to Mark chapter 6, verses 45 through 52. It's in page 997 if you have a Pew Bible, 997. We're going to look at the disciples were going to be cast into a storm. And I think there's some principles, because the Bible doesn't just give you these stories to say, okay, good, they went through trouble. There are some principles there. If we're careful, if we dissect them, we can find the principles to discover how to find Jesus in the presence of our storm. This particular story occurs shortly after Jesus just gets done feeding the 5,000. His disciples had to be kind of revved up because, wow, wouldn't that be cool? You saw a miracle. Cool. Prior to that, they got their marching orders and they were told they could go out and heal and deliver people from demons and do all these miraculous things. They said you're going to go into full-time ministry. Now, they might be a little bit shaken because also just prior to this, John the Baptist, they dragged his beheaded body to bury it because John the Baptist decided to speak God's truth. That kind of mess you up. I'm going to send you guys into the world to preach this gospel, but let's look at this text, Mark 6:45 through 52, and hopefully we'll be able to find some principles that will be effective for us in going through the storms of our lives. It says, immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into a boat and go ahead of him to Bethsaida while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up to a mountainside to pray. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was all alone on the land. Verse 48, he saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. It was about the fourth watch of the night. He went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by. But when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and they were terrified. And immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Now I'm going to insert in this exact part of the story, Matthew gives us some more detail. It says, "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why do you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And they climbed into the boat, and the wind died down, and they were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves, for their hearts were hardened. Have you been in a storm? Maybe today you're here and you are going through a marital storm. Your marriage is on a thread. Just hanging on. Maybe there's some kind of family conflict that has rocked your world. That's cast your little boat and almost capsizing you. Maybe it's financial. October came and you're getting close to retirement and your 401k was wiped out. Maybe you've lost your job in this business economy. There's hard things. There's a storm that hit in the recent months and you're wondering where in the world where you find employment. Maybe you're hearing the thunderclaps of fear in your life for some reason, something going on in your world today. Maybe it's the crashing waves of worry about somebody that's wayward in your family that you wonder if they'll ever get it. Maybe you're here today and you have the breakers of an addiction that you cannot be set free from. It is crashing into your life. Maybe there's some kind of upheaval within your relationships. Things didn't work out the way you planned, and there's hard things in your life. I think those are storms. And I believe there's some principles, if we look carefully at this text, I believe there are some principles that I think you might find helpful. So let's look at Mark 6, starting in verse 45. Immediately Jesus, underline this word, made. He made his disciples get into a boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida. He made. You know what that word means? It means constrained or compelled. You had to. I'm going to make you go. Do you realize that sometimes Jesus makes us go into a storm? He didn't ask for their opinion. He didn't say, guys, can we take a vote on this? Didn't ask for a vote. He didn't make it optional. Because I believe his disciples needed to learn something that could only be learned in a storm. There are some things that we only learn from a storm. Somebody once said, sometimes God leads people into the tempest to teach us what cannot be taught in comfort. Did you hear what I said? Sometimes Jesus leads us, constrains us, makes us, allows us, permits us to go through a storm. Because when we go through that storm, there are things that you will discover in that storm that you could never, ever learn when the seas are calm. I love what Vernell Davis says. She says, God is doing a greater work in us, and that can only come as we learn to trust Him, no matter how dark the days or sleepless the nights. And it's only when we've been through the darkness with Him that we know in our heads, what we know in our heads slides down into our hearts. And our hearts no longer demand answers. The why becomes unimportant. When we believe that God can and will redeem the pain for our good and His glory. When I put the sovereignty of God beside His unfailing love, my heart can rest. Did you hear what that was? God has to allow us to sometimes get to a point in the storm where we quit asking the reasons why. And say, God, I don't know why. You don't owe me an explanation for everything in life. All I know is you're sufficient and you're enough. And all I know is you'll get me through. And all I know is that I need you. And you're my ever-present strength in this storm of my life. This particular storm was no ordinary storm. It was no ordinary storm. These were seasoned men of the sea. If you look at Mark 6:48, it says the disciples were straining at the oars. Picture it. They are 3.5 to 4 miles out in the midst of a terrible storm. Because of the way the hills go around the Sea of Galilee, the winds and a cold air front and a warm air front when they meet, this wind would be violent. And because it's relatively shallow, the winds blowing against that shallowness creates huge waves. It's kind of like if you took a dish and put it with water. If you blew on it, the water would blow off the plate. Versus blowing into a pool, you just make ripples. That's what was happening. Matthew account of the same story says they were a long way from land. The disciples were a long way from land. 3.5, 4 miles of a 7-mile wide piece of sea. Beaten by the waves. Have you been beaten by the waves? And the wind was against them. The wind was not in your favor. The wind was not helping. The more I rowed, the more it seemed like I'm going, and I'm going backwards. It tells us that the boat was buffeted, being punished. It was tossed by the waves. The sea was getting, according to John, was getting rougher and rougher and rising high because a great and violent wind was blowing. You know, there are 3 basic causes of a storm. You know, there may be more, but 3 basic ones. Let me tell you what they are. There are storms that we cause. We cause them, and they're the consequence of our own behavior, our own decisions. There are storms that we cause. There are storms that others cause. They're the results of others' behaviors, other people's decisions that cause a storm in our life, or something that happened to somebody else close up that causes a storm in our world. But that's another reason there's a cause of a storm. And thirdly, there are storms that God has designed to test us and to approve us and to mature us. But the one thing I want you to know about storms, whether you invented it, or God allowed it, or God created it for you, He'll never waste a storm. He'll never waste a storm. Larry was out of work, had a storm in his life. And I'd call him and I said, Larry, God will teach you stuff in the midst of the storm. And He did. God tells us there will be storms. So I want you to know that all of us, at some point, if we aren't now, we will go through a storm in our life. All of us, sometime. The Bible says that. Jesus said, in this world you will have storms, tribulations. Just get ready. Remember Job's friend Eliphaz says, a man's life is destined for storms of trouble just as sure as sparks fly upward. We must remember God is sovereign. Sovereign. He rules over and can use any storm for His purpose. God never wastes life storms. Jerry Bridges says, one thing we might be sure of, however, for the believer, all pain has meaning. All adversity is profitable. There is no question that adversity is difficult. It usually takes us by surprise and seems to strike when we are most vulnerable. To us, it often appears senseless or irrational. He has a purpose in every pain He brings or allows in our life. We can be sure that in some way He intends it for our profit and His glory. God never wastes a storm. He'll never waste your storm. Storms will either make you a better believer. You will grow and develop and you will learn the lesson of the storm, or you will fight the storm and you'll become a bitter believer and you'll blame God and curse God. Nahum chapter 1 verse 3, there's an interesting verse that says this. It says, the Lord has His way in the whirlwind and in the storm. The Lord has His way in the whirlwind and the storm. In other words, even if this storm is from somebody else, something that you caused, God says, I can use that to weave it into my plan, to bring you to the place that I have to bring you, to teach you what I need to teach you. Because there are some things you can't learn through the calm days of life. You only can learn them in the tempest of a storm. Lots of people in the Bible went through storms. Remember, Job had a storm. Remember, Job was a righteous man. The one thing I'm going to tell you about storms is that you don't have to be out of the will of God. You don't have to be unspiritual to be in a storm. Some of God's most spiritual people went through storms, and it's not a measure of your spirituality oftentimes. God allows storms because storms are sometimes the only thing that can teach us the deep things. Remember, it was Job who lost his family, his home, his everything. His wife gives us some good advice, didn't she? Curse God and die. Right? Thank you, honey. Curse God and die. You're going through a hard thing in your life, and the best advice she gives you should just curse God and die. Here's what he said, even if God slays me. Even if the worst thing happens, I'm going to choose to trust Him because He's trustworthy and He is good and He is holy. And the God of the universe will always do that which is right, even when I don't understand it. I'm going to trust Him. Why does God allow us to go through storms? Storms can assay your faith. James chapter 1 verses 2 to 4 says this, consider it pure joy when you go through various storms. Do you like that verse? Consider it pure joy when you go through storms? Wouldn't you want to write, consider it pure joy when you get out of storms? Yeah. But somehow God says storms can be good. What? I hate storms. I don't want a storm. Consider pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials and storms of many kinds, because you know the testing of your faith develops perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work so you may be mature and complete and not lacking anything. I love what it said in the Message Bible. It says, consider a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides, storms from all sides. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced out into the open to show its true colors. Do you hear what that said? In the storms, your faith life is forced out into the open to show your true colors. You see, I can have a theology today, but the real theology will be exposed, will be assayed when we go through the troubles and challenges and storms of life. I'll know what you're leaning on. I'll know what I'm leaning on. That great theologian Dolly Parton said it this way. She said, storms make trees take deep roots. Storms make trees take deep roots. You see, storms can awaken us in our lives when we're going astray, like Jonah. If you remember what C.S. Lewis has said, God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our conscience, but He shouts to us in our pain. He says it's the megaphone to rouse a deaf world. If God really wants to get your attention, not to beat you up, to wake you up, a storm will do that. Storms can redirect your lives and redirect your priorities. And, I don't want or claim that I've been through lots of storms, but 7 years ago I was in Montana skiing with Bethany. We had a ski trip, and we had just gotten done a day of skiing, and I'm in a Chinese restaurant, and everybody was there. The kids said, we're going to go back to the hotel. We said, fine. They all went back to the hotel. And about 15 minutes later, an out-of-breath young man runs in the door and says, Mr. Twite, your daughter's been hit by a car. Everything went still. You ever been in one of those slow motion times? A fog. I remember running, but feeling like I was going nowhere. Running in this hazy, wet 4-lane highway in Big Sky, Montana. I could see a body about 200 yards ahead, laying in the middle of a 4-lane. That'll mess you up. That's a thunderclap. I remember what went through my head. First thing I said is, God, whatever I have to learn, help me to learn it quickly. Whatever it is I have to learn, help me to learn it quickly. Second thing I remember, like yesterday, it was, God, you owe me nothing. You owe me nothing. But please show your kindness. I ran up to my daughter's unconscious body at that time. Somebody had turned her over. She was hit at 45 miles an hour in the head. Looking down, I kneeled down on the ground and I thought my daughter could be dead. Your world, not a lot of things matter at those moments in your life. You crystallize things, important things. I got on my knee down by her, and I remember thinking, if she's dead, I wished I would have told her I loved her one more time. And I've held that with me as a dad. Because you never know. You never know. Our life is a mist and a vapor and a flower that's here for a short while and gone in a blink. I got beside her and she did open one eye and barely, and she said, Daddy, am I going to die? I don't know. Ambulance comes, takes her in the ambulance, and there was a hospital in town. They said, we can't go there. This is much too serious. We have to go to Kalispell, Montana, where there's a regional medical center, and it's 45 minutes away. I got to go in the ambulance and with my daughter sitting in the back and listening to her say, Daddy, am I going to die? She had retrograde and antegrade amnesia. She couldn't remember anything. She remembered me, but didn't remember anything else. And that's a hard time for a dad. And you have to think, God, I have to trust you. Miraculously, going to the hospital and wait for the reports. Is there brain damage? What's going to happen? How bad it is? And you go through lots. But somehow God sustained us, and there were others from the church there. And I remember, it was weird because I remember ministering to the chaplain that was there, because he was more messed up than we were. That night, my wife held my daughter and prayed through the night. She walked out of that hospital the next day. No brain damage. That's physically impossible. She was thrown 40 feet out of her shoes. It doesn't always happen that way, but it did. God was gracious, God was kind. But you know what? It tests your mettle. And God just healed her. But He did something to me through the storm. He realigned my priorities. Storms can develop us. Storms can work in our lives. Storms do a lot for us. Look at verse 46. It says, after leaving them, He went up on a mountainside to pray. So during the disciples' storm, what is Jesus doing? Praying. You see, I think that's a picture. Jesus is interceding. When you're going through a storm, Jesus is interceding for you. Romans 8:34. Who is He who condemns? Jesus Christ, who died. More than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of God, who is also interceding for us. Remember in the book of Luke, Simon Peter was going to go through this hard storm of challenge in his life. And here's what Jesus said. Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat through a storm. But I prayed for you. I'm praying for you that your faith will not fail. I'm praying for you during your storm that your faith will not fail. In other words, I'm praying that you'll look to me. I'm praying that you'll realize that I'm all you need, that I will go through this storm with you. I will give you what you need. I'm praying for you that you will not just look to yourself and not just let your little boat be capsized by the problem, but you will look to me. I'm praying that your faith, your trust in me does not fail. Hebrews 7 says that Jesus, He always lives to intercede for them. He always lives to intercede for us. He speaks to the Father in our defense, but He intercedes for us. Verse 48, and He saw. I underline that word, saw. They're 3.5 to 4 miles out in the middle of the night, and He sees them. You know what one of God's names is? El Roi, R-O-I. It means the God who sees. When you are in the little craft of your life and going through a storm, God sees you. He sees you. He sees you. He saw the disciples straining at the oars. 3 to 4 miles out, but He still sees you. Job calls God the watcher of men. He watches us. Psalms 139 says, O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out, my coming in, my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. God, you don't take your eye off of me. Huh. You know why? The Bible tells us we're the apple of His eye. He's etched our name on His hand, and you're the apple of His eye. He's a loving God that never takes His eye off you, even when you're going through the storm. El Roi sees, the God who sees past your misery, your present pain, your uncertain future. He's so watchful, and He knows when the smallest sparrow falls. You are much more valuable than sparrows, and He watches you. He never takes His eye off His people. He says, I will watch over you. You're coming in and you're going out forever. The Lord watches over all who love Him. Psalm 145, verse 20. Verse 48 of Mark chapter 6. About the fourth watch of the night, About the fourth watch of the night, he went out to him. Now let me get this. They left at dusk. It's the fourth watch of the night. It's 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. They have been struggling for 9 hours while Jesus is watching them and praying for them. Here's what I put there. Jesus waits. Sometimes Jesus waits. Wouldn't we like Him just to come quickly and just take our problem away, and God, we could just instant coffee, instant Jesus, God, I got a problem, just take it away. There's something in the divine understanding that recognizes the greatest tool in His arsenal sometimes is when everything goes silent. When the waves are crashing and you're praying and nothing's happening. Consider the testing of your faith more precious than gold. Consider the testing. That tests your faith. Faith is not when you pray a prayer and it happens right away. That's a magic trick. Faith is trusting God like Job did, even when He slays you. Even when there's no hay in the barn, no cattle in the stall, no fig on the tree. That's what faith is. It's waiting. It's the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk says, I'm going to stand at the ramparts and I will wait. I hate to wait. I hate it. I wish God would come fast, but God says, you know what, I got to develop your character because I need to use you in deeper ways, and I can't use people with weak character. He waits. Isaiah 30 verse 18 says, therefore will the Lord wait, that He might be gracious unto you. He waits to be gracious. How is Habakkuk going to wait in the book of Habakkuk when the Babylonians were going to take over? It was going to be a hard time. He discovers it in chapter 2. He said, your grace is sufficient. You'll give me somehow this buoyancy that should flip my boat, but God, you're going to give me something to get through this storm. Ballast. You're going to give me ballast in my boat. You're going to give me buoyancy. Second Peter 3:9 says the Lord does not delay. He's not tardy. He's not slow. Do you ever feel like He's slow? Isaiah said, God, you're the God who hides Himself. Where are you? Do you ever cry out to God in a hard time during a storm of your life and wonder where He is? How come you're not here? Martha did that. Remember that? Had you been here 4 days ago, my brother would still be alive. Lazarus would still be alive. You're too late. Jesus had to be late. Because everybody knew Him as the provider of bread, but Jesus wanted to demonstrate to Martha that He is the resurrection and the life. God is never late. He's never late. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart and wait for Him, Psalm 27:14. Why does God wait? He waits for us. Why does God wait? Why did He wait 9 hours? He had to wait for these disciples to get rid of their own little feeble attempts at solving their own problem. You see, they're fishermen. They're men of the sea. I think Peter said, guys, here's what we do, right? You need to get the sail down and, hunker into the middle and we'll hold on to the seat and you'll bail with the one hand, you're bailing water. And, I think Jesus said, you know what, if I came right now, they will say what? Got her all under control, Jesus. You just stay right back on the Golan Heights there and we'll let you know if we need you. Right? That's what you do. Some of you are going through a storm of a marital issue that has put your marriage on a thread and you're saying it's beyond hope. We've tried all the classes. I got the Dobson book. I did Fireproof. Not going to work. Jesus is saying, come to me. Come to me. You see, it's not a technique that you need. It's a person, the Lord Jesus, in your life and in your boat and in your storm. He waits for us to realize the foolishness and futility of our self-effort. He waits for us to come to our senses sometimes. Sometimes God waits for us like the prodigal son who goes off and squanders his treasure on wine, women, and song and ends up in a pig pen of life. Why a parent is going crazy thinking my kid's got to be dead by now. Because he's so reckless. But God was waiting for a perfect time. And when he's eating those pods of that pig, here's what the verse says. And he came to his senses. God said, I needed enough drama and hardship and difficulty of a storm to come in His world, so He's eating His pig pods. All one day He said, what am I doing here? Sometimes God allows these to wake you up, to get your attention, to have you come to your senses. But He has to let us run out of our human options. Rowing will not work. Bailing water will not help. Swimming is useless. We're in the middle of a 7-mile stretch and there's no way back. You see, in those particular times when there's no way back and you can't do anything else, when you are so far down, here's what you have. You have no place to look but up. You ever been so far down you have no place to look but up? Jesus is praying. Jesus is interceding. Jesus is watching. Jesus is waiting. For the eyes of the Lord go to and fro throughout the whole earth, looking to strengthen the heart of those who are fully committed to Him. He's waiting. He's waiting to show Himself strong on your behalf. He's waiting because if you think you have what it takes, He's going to wait for you to get done with your little tricks. Because those who wait upon the Lord, Isaiah 40, 29 and 31, those who wait upon the Lord, they will, get this word, renew their strength. Renew. That word renew, if you unpack it in the Hebrew, you will exchange your strength. Actually, your lack of strength for His strength. Those who wait on the Lord, they will exchange their weakness for His strength if you wait for Him. Our waiting on the Lord is tangible proof and trust. It's tangible proof of the trust and confidence that He will work even prior to His answer coming. Waiting is saying, I'm confident that God is on the way. He is accomplishing something even in the silence. I'm going to wait on Him. I'm going to wait for Him. Verse 48. About the fourth watch of the night, He went out to them walking on the lake. And listen to this. He intended only to pass by. What? What? I'm struggling for 9 hours out here, Jesus, and you're going to only pass by? This is when I need you, buddy. He only intended to pass by. That bothered me for a long time, and I don't know. You probably can parse the Greek better than I can, and so if you disagree with me, that's fine. You're just wrong. I think the reason He only intended to pass by is this. He knows when you're almost out of gas. He knows when your options are running out. He knows when you're at that point where maybe you're so far down that you might look up. Because it's senseless for Him to come any earlier, right? So He's going to, rather than sit on the Golan Heights 3.5, 4 miles out, He says, I'm going to get really close. Right? Because it's getting right. If anything, this got to be working. The storm's got to be working, so you're going to look to me. And He comes near. Isaiah 55:6 says, seek the Lord while He may be found. Call on Him while He is near. Near. You see, God waits. And during your storm of life, He waits when you're done flailing your arms and bailing your water. He says, I'm going to come near to you. I'm right here. So you can't miss me. I'm the ever-present help in time of trouble. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. Psalms 34:17 through 19. He's close. Close. The Lord is near to all who call upon Him, all who call upon Him in truth. In verse 50, what happens? Immediately He spoke to them and said, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Here's what He's saying. Literally, He said, take courage. Achia. Probably didn't speak in Hebrew, but the Hebrew was Achia. You know what He said? The holy name of God. I am. Guess who's here? I am. Same thing He said to Moses. Who should I say you are? I am who I am. I am. You see, I'm deity. I'm just not a friend. I'm just not a traveling prophet with a good, story. I'm God incarnate. And I want to get close to you in your storm because I know what you're going through, and man, I've been watching you. And I'm praying that your faith wouldn't fail. But your faith needs to be focused on me. Don't be afraid, he said then. You know what the greatest, number one commandment in the Bible is? I mean, the more times than any other command in the Bible, there's one of them. Fear not. Don't be afraid. Number one, 366 times. In fact, there's one for every day of the year, including leap year. We must have an issue with fear. Because fear paralyzes us. Fear says, when we're paralyzed in fear, here's what we're saying in our hearts. God, I don't trust you. God, I don't believe you. God. God says, if you don't believe who I am, don't expect to see anything from me. Fear is unbelief parading in disguise. Fear is unbelief that is parading in disguise. The next, I had Matthew's account, but for time's sake, I'm going to skip over it. But if you go to Mark 6:51, this is after Jesus walks on the water with Peter, and there's some great illustrations in there that make it fascinating about how we need to keep our eyes on Jesus in the midst of the storm, or we sink into the problem. Mark 6:51 says, "Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the winds died down." The John passage of this that says, when they let him into the boat. They let him into the boat. First he comes near, they're afraid of him because they didn't expect God to arrive, right? Good spiritual guys that they were. But they let him into the boat. You see, Jesus wanted to join them in the midst of the storm. In your storm, whatever that is, or whatever that was, or whatever you're going to go through, Jesus wants to come in and travel with you through the storm. He doesn't always take the storm away. Sometimes the storm goes on. But He'll give you everything you need. He's going to come with you. Remember, He joins you in the storm. Remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? The king says, I'm going to take these guys, burn them in this furnace. And threw the 3 guys in the furnace. The next day he looks in the window and he said, hey, I put 3 guys in there. I see a 4th. As of the Son of Man. Jesus, pre-incarnate, in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's storm. And these guys go through the fire without being burned, and they don't even smell like smoke. Because Jesus wants to join them in the boat of their storm. Verse 52, and they did not understand about the loaves and the fishes, for their hearts were hardened. What's that? You see, these guys were thick. You know, if you think you have a challenging Bible class, these guys didn't get it. They just got done with a great lesson. I mean, they just watched the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus provided in the midst of a lack of food storm, food with the kids' lunch. He said, you learn nothing from that. You caught right over your head. I think I know why. That particular storm of the food wasn't their problem. It's easy for me to give you spiritual truths when it's not my problem. I don't take this lightly. I don't say, God, put me to the test, because I am but dust. And we are weak and frail. But they didn't learn the lesson that Jesus is enough. The problem that you face, as long as Jesus is there, He is enough. He is sufficient. He'll give you everything that you need for your marriage. He'll give it to you. Not a technique, it's Him. It's Him in His rightful place, captaining the vessel of your life. You better slide over and let go of your lures and let Him take over. The biggest problem I have is because I want Jesus to come in the boat, but I want to continue to do what I'm doing. In my own power, my own strength. And you wonder why you fail. Jesus said, apart from me, you can do nothing. You can't fix your storm. but you can do all things when I am your strength. The Old Testament says it is God who tramples, God alone tramples on the waves. He's not afraid of the waves. He'll use your storms. I'm going to close with a quote by Alan Redpath. He says, "There is no circumstance, no trouble, no testing that can ever touch me until first it has gone past Christ, right through to me. If it has come that far, it has come for some great purpose which I may not understand at the moment. But I refuse to become panicky as I lift my eyes to Him and accept it as coming from the throne of God for some great purpose of blessing to my own heart." Today, if you're in a storm, there's a God who sees you. There's a God who's interceding for you, that your faith is, your dependence on Him won't fail, that you won't say, "God, you don't work, and I'm going to blame you." And look to me. He's waiting for you to quit all your stupid techniques. He's waiting for you just to give up the oars and say, "God, you must come in. You are my only hope. Transform this craft." In the book of John, this same story, John 6:21, it says this, "And that when they were willing to take Him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading." Immediately? Now, I don't know if it was literal. It could have been miraculous. They were just there. But I think the key is this. Once Jesus is in His rightful role as captain of the vessel in the midst of your storm, as far as God's concerned, as far as heavens is concerned, you're on the other side. That's all you need. If He keeps you in it, you say, "God, this is somehow for my good. This will be tough, but you're here, so I know you're going to take care of me, and your grace will sustain me. But God, once you're in that place, whether you bring me to the other side safely or you do something else here, as long as you're here, I'm on the other side." A righteous man may have many troubles, but the Lord will deliver them from them all. Deliverance is not the absence of a storm. Deliverance is not the absence of a storm, but it's the presence of Christ in the midst of your storm. How are you doing today? Is there a storm in your life? Is there a issue going on in your life? Is there an addiction in your life that has crashed into the craft of your life and is turning your life upside down? Do you have a situation, in a marital situation, where you said, "You know what, it's all but done"? Oh, you have little faith. You have little faith. But you don't understand. Mine is different. Mine is different, God. Mine's bigger. Yeah, you have little faith. I'm going to give you what it takes to sustain you and to repair you, because I'd love to give a demonstration to the demons in hell what the living God can do to a broken craft of life. We're going to pray now, and I'd like you just to join me in prayer. If today you say, "God, that's me. I'm in a storm, and God, I've been doing everything in my own power, my own strength, and my own enthusiasm, and God, I acknowledge you, I pray to you, but God, you're just kind of like a sidebar. You're like my little helper, but God, I got to tell you something. If you don't do something, nothing will happen. But God, you're going to have to teach me to be dependent upon you. You're going to have to increase my faith. You're going to have to give me a hunger and thirst for your righteousness. And God, you're going to have to forgive me for all the times I just totally doubted you." And God simply waits for that moment. And God says, "That's all I've been waiting for. Thanks for inviting me into the craft of your life. And I'll immediately get you to whatever the other side is of this magical, marvelous journey that I have you on. And you know what? This world is not your home. So if the hard things linger, if the clouds still come, just remember this life is but a mist or vapor or flower. I'm preparing your life to be at a greater place that will last forever and to teach you character and dependence and holiness." God, I pray that you will meet needs in this place today, that if anybody is today going through a storm, that you will be the God who sees, and you will be the God who intercedes, and you will be the God who meets their needs and bring them to the other side. In Jesus' name.